Our guest tonight has worked on some of the most famous comic books in the industry. Just to give you an idea, we're talking about X-Men, we're talking about the Avengers, we're talking about Daredevil, we're talking about Tomb of Dracula, we're talking about Kick-Ass, we're also talking about Star Wars and Conan the Barbarian. He is an amazing and respected inker. His lush and detailed line work is just immaculate. He's also worked with some of the greatest pencilers in the industry. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest tonight is Tom Palmer. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about, a lot of people who don't work in comics might not know what an inker is. You're much more than an inker. You have an amazing background, a draftsman, illustrator, painter, but you're mainly known as an inker. So to the layman, please explain a little bit of what an inker is.
Basically, it's applying ink to an artist's pencils, and they either don't have the time to do it, or like in John Buscema's case, he did a book a week, but he did breakdowns, very loose. So you need somebody to ink it and define it. But I started out working with Gene Colan, and since I was in the business, advertising business, in the studio, and using tools, I just kind of winged it with Gene, and it turned out that they were looking for something like that. I worked into the shadows and was able to define a lot more that was going on. So when I came back, they said, do you want to do more inking? So I said, sure. I was doing advertising, but not making enough money. And plus they didn't pay for 90 days sometimes. You're doing a piece of artwork, yeah, until it printed. It was in a magazine. I mean, I was doing big stuff, but I was doing. And I should mention here that I was in the studio, and Jack Kamen was the illustrator. Jack Kamen from EC days, and
You're dropping a lot of amazing names.
Wait a minute, I walked in there, I was, I say a kid, but I knew very little. And the guy that had the studio, I had a freelance in there, and he wasn't going to get me, or have me start. But he said, oh, this is our illustrator, Jack Kamen. I said, are you Jack Kamen from the EC comic? Well, Jack fell in love with me. So, the guy that owned the studio said, all right, enough of that. So Jack says, hire the kid.
Nice.
And yeah, so
that had to be
I was
an
there
amazing
like 4
moment
years.
for such a big legend to be like, hey, let's get this kid on board.
He used to hand me all his old brushes, which were only, he never cleaned his Winsor Newton brushes. Wow. He would shake them in the water, and in a week, he would use up a brush, and I had all these brushes.
Wow.
So
anyway. let's talk a little bit about the tools. You mentioned the tools. Let's talk about some of the tools that you really like using, and some of the things where we talked about, you know, all the grays and all the different, what are some of the things that you like to do, and what tools that you really like to use?
Well, this is a fun time. I'm working on something right now, and I can do whatever I want. I mean, literally. I use acrylics, I use casein, I use pastel, charcoal. Once I scan that and make a digital file, I'll work in Photoshop also and send it to the site, the publisher's site, whether it's Marvel, DC, or IDW, Valiant. You don't send the artwork around anymore. You know, you kind of send a file. You can do whatever you want, because once you scan it, it's great grayscale. It's not like the old days. It was all line. It was letterpress, and you had to either use Zippertone or a line or dry brush. You couldn't use anything. Well, Neal used to use pencil. I mean, he used to use a wolf pencil every once in a while. He did something.
Neal Adams.
Yeah, Neal. Oh, I'm sorry, Neal Adams.
Yeah.
Gee.
A little insider trading there.
Yeah.
But, awesome. So
dropping names here. Yeah.
So let's take it to the beginning. Okay. You're a kid. I heard you were on crutches for a while, which gave you a lot of time to draw. Let's talk about your first kind of love of comics, or your first kind of inspiration, or where that came from.
Well, my older brother, I had older siblings. He had comic books, and I guess I just loved them, and I used to work on them. And the crutches thing, it was a congenital hip problem that put me on crutches in the middle of the 3rd grade until the middle of the 8th grade.
Oh, wow.
So that 4-year period, I sat and drew all the time, making my own comic books. Too bad I threw most of them away. I think I have one left. Because as you get older, when you're a teenager, you're embarrassed by them. But I have my own characters and everything. But
oh, man. Wish I had a time machine.
Well, how did I learn? I'm just trying to think. remember going upstate with a friend. They had a cabin up in the Adirondacks, and I remember I loved Wally Wood stuff, and I remember drawing one of the comic books, one of the stories he did, big, all of it, just copying everything.
Oh wow!
And so there was always there. This is, but the crutches, I think, not trying to sound like Tiny Tim or something.
No, please.
But
you were on crutches. It's
no,
a
yeah,
fact,
no. But
yeah.
what it did, it gave me. I was comfortable with myself. You've got to sit and draw, even when you're an adult, no matter how old you are. You've got to sit there by yourself. It's solitary, and you got to be cool with yourself. If you've got problems, and you can't do something wrong and do it over. You can't fuss over everything else. So that, I think, was the biggest asset from that period of time. Nice. Every negative has a positive in life, and that was perfect.
Nice.
That was true.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing. If you use something to your advantage, and it really took you a really
I didn't
long
realize
way.
it at the time.
Yeah, of course.
No.
Yeah, who has that kind of insight? But
I got lost
awesome.
a little bit when in my teenage years, but I was striping cars, painting dashboards, jackets. I was always making money on my own, doing artwork, but never thought about hustling. Yeah.
Awesome.
But never. Well, that has a double connotation.
Yeah, well, I'm not talking about the other kind. Yeah. But let's talk about the next step, your art education. You kind of bounced all over the place a little bit. Talk about your kind of art college experience and how you kind of refined your skill.
Well, I spent a little bit of time at School of Visual Arts. I was going nights. I was in the studio during the day. And I wasn't getting what I wanted. I wanted to learn how to paint. And they didn't have a good course at the time. And I dropped out, and an artist I met said, a famous teacher who used to be at the League, he took over for George Bridgman, I believe, has his own school now, Frank Reilly. And he was up on 57th Street. And he said, a lot of guys, a lot of good artists, and I love James Baumer's work on Doc Savage. And plus the men's magazine, I was buying the back issues of just loved it. He was the next student. I went, oh. So I go up to Frank Reilly's school, and I enrolled. And I probably should have been there more than, I was there a couple of years. I should have been there longer, going at night, because you had to first go through a drawing class. And when you were good enough, because he used to say you can only paint as well as you draw.
Oh.
It makes sense, you got to do the figure. Color, but then I got into the painting class. That's when it really, matter of fact, he was older at the time. The painting monitor was Roger Castell. I don't know if that name rings a bell with anybody. He did the Jaws movie poster.
Oh, wow.
He did the Empire Strikes Back poster.
Okay, now I know who you're talking about.
He's still
Yep.
upstate New York, and he's a terrific artist. But that was the big change for me, going to Reilly's, because I then had a bigger grasp of the business and painting, and then working in the studio with Jack, watching how he put an illustration together. I sat a few feet away from him.
That had to be, that's my next
That was
question.
schooling also. It's like saying which was the better school.
Share a studio with Jack Kamen. I mean,
Yeah.
that had to be like 101 of how to do things.
Absolutely.
I mean, do you at that point just think you're the lucky, or are you?
I was too young and dumb and stupid. What the hell did I?
Right.
I just loved it, and to this day, I love doing artwork.
Right.
And not to make a segue here, but I have a computer. I work on a computer, but it's sterile to me to sit with a tablet. I'll do that at the end, but there's something that is so exciting about using a pencil and make a mark, or a brush and paint. I do use different paints. I do, casein or oil or acrylic, watercolor.
You talked about how it's important to kind of really try everything instead of just being like, I'm just going to be a comic book artist.
Well, when I was coming up, learning, you could tell who the artist was from across the room. A paperback cover, you knew that was Jim Baumer. You knew this was Bob McGinnis. These names, I don't know if they ring. Bob McGinnis to this day, I met him up at the Society. He's still painting. He's 90, he must be 90 years old. But Bob McGinnis and Bob Peake and all the illustrators, Howard Turpning, I could go down a whole list. And I was always, I had to buy that. Frank Frazetta, perfect example, right? You could see his paperback from across the room.
Blowing my mind.
So that's the era. you know, of having a style. And Frank used to work in watercolor, and I don't know if in acrylic, but the oils, his oils were just beautiful. Jim Bomber in oils too, very close values. I remember Frank Reilly saying that, well, we used to take photos, models. I did a lot of shoots with Steve Holland. Steve Holland was his Doc Savage. And Steve Holland, oh my God, I've got shots of him. He just was beautiful, but black and white. You don't want color to interfere, because color is incidental. It's the values. The light and dark is what makes a picture work, even in comic books. And sadly, sometimes the coloring can ruin some nice drawing because
I know that
they don't. You know,
I've definitely seen pencils sent off to be colored, and then people make different choices, and all of a sudden it's a completely different image, completely different tone.
Yeah, it was different starting out. The coloring, I remember. This is far enough away. I think people can be upset. The first Doctor Strange I inked, first comic book I ever inked, and they had a 3-month lag before they came out. And I really put a lot of work into it because this was going to sell me, right? And I have some pages back from it, as a matter of fact. But I saw it in print, and I won't mention names, but somebody colored it. It was just, everything was green and purple. And this little lizard that was in there was all, I noodled it up. It was purple on top of it, which is just like, you know, blue and red. And you don't see anything. And I went up to Marvel, saw Roy Thomas, and said, Roy, he said, I possibly color these? So he said, sure, go see Marie Severin. And Marie was in charge of all that. So she showed me, you had these balls on chart, you know, of color. He had 3 values, 100%, 25%, 50%, I guess. And somehow you juggled them all together and you got a comic book. There were dots and then solid. So we had to learn, I remember Neal, I was coloring some of the books we worked on because he and I both worked down in the chart. No one went down. Well, when you start to mix a lot of colors, it gets, Neal was saying, I think DC at the time wouldn't allow you to do it because they thought it was going to bleed through the paper. But if you use complementary colors, it would get grayer.
Okay.
But then you put a gray down red and put a blue, a light blue next to it, it pops. Or yellow, it's the opposite. It just, so I went wild and I said, how long does it take to do these, color a book? And it was Stan Goldberg was doing, he says, well, he does at least 1 a day. I said, oh, okay. So I go back to the apartment, and it took me 3 days later, I was still coloring that first Doctor Strange I colored. Wow. And they paid $350. Not $350, $3.50.
Oh, I was going to say $3.50.
Now, when I colored the books, that was a gesture of love for the medium. You wanted it to look good, and I'm not saying it was good, but I was pleased with it. I knew what it was going to be. And the chemical color, they would hand separate, but it was very simple. You know, like flesh was YR, Y2, R2 or something. Wow. So it was a different business. And today, that's probably the problem. There's too much. You can do too much with color today.
Much, yeah. Do you think some people can like, drive themselves crazy with like, oh, maybe if I keep trying this, like there's so much?
I don't know. You know, Photoshop is all about color. And I wonder how many people paint. The only way you can really learn color, you can't read about it. Right. You got to do it. And in art school, we used to have to tube our own flush colors at Reilly. You have to sit and mix paint, oil paint, and see what one color looks like to the other. Wow. And you teach yourself, you teach your eyes how, or your brain, about color. But you have to paint. I just feel that you can't read about it or walk in and do it in Photoshop. We were talking inside before. Milton Glaser, famous graphic artist, said something about the computer. They asked him, what do you think about the computer? Right. And he said, oh, it's great, you know, wonderful. He said, except your first sketch looks so good, you never do your 27th one.
Oh, wow.
And that may not mean much to a lot of people, but if you sit with a piece of thumbnails, how many artists will talk about thumbnails? every artist, whether it was John Buscema or Neal, Neal Adams,
Right.
the back, you see what they were doing. You have to find it. But if you do it on a computer, it looks so good sometimes, I guess. You go with it. So anyway, I don't mean to be knocking the
No, please.
computer.
So let's talk about the first kind of job at Marvel, 1968. You first started as a penciler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I walked in the door and they gave me, Stan acted that out in his office.
Stan Lee.
Stan Lee. And I stood
When
there.
you say he acted it out?
That's what he did with everybody. When Kirby was in, or Buscema, he was jumping on the couch, he was doing, and I was.
So he would just act out the comic for you? Is that what you're saying?
That's what he did with me. And wait a minute. Luckily, Flo Steinberg was his gal Friday. She's still up at Marvel as a proofreader. She was so nice. She stood at the door and was taking clip notes. She was taking notes. Because I just stood in awe. I walked out and he says, "Okay, you ready to go?" Stand there. "Hey, okay, you ready to go?" And I walked out and I didn't know what I was going to do. And she said, she handed me this. So obviously my storytelling skills, I had never penciled a comic book before. I did a little penciling for Wally Wood. I had worked a little bit with him, but nothing like this.
So we've talked about some big names, but let's talk about the differences between working with Colan, Buscema, and Neal Adams. Very different styles, very different techniques. How would you kind of approach each one, or how would you kind of look at it?
Well, the first one was Gene. Worked with him for a while, and then met Neal through Roy Thomas, and then I guess Neal, I don't know, liked what I was doing. I don't know. I never asked him about that, but doing with Doctor Strange,
You
But
never asked him why he liked you?
Well, I wouldn't say he liked me, but he asked for me to work with him on the X-Men.
That's an honor.
I assume that.
Yeah.
Anyway. And I think because I didn't realize at the time, but he worked in a John Stone Cushing, big line-on studio over New York. And I had some studio time also, and I think maybe it showed. I'm just guessing. I never asked him about that. So it kind of worked out on the X-Men, I had some color experience, but also, I don't know if I colored any of those. Yeah, I think I did. But Neal was coloring too. But the line work did not throw me. I kind of knew where Neal was going. Beautiful pencils, by the way. When I first saw his pencils, they were using the pencil in the way to really draw, not a point.
Oh, wow.
He used it as where you can turn it and have something soft and then sharp. A real pro. I mean, I just went, wow, this is really good stuff, Now I have to try to depict that, so I spent a lot of time doing it, but it was worthwhile. You learn from whoever you're working with.
Right.
I found that out later.
Now, the first time you're working with like a new penciler, is there something that you kind of, like a discussion you have with each one? Like, what do you like to highlight, don't like this, or you just kind of support what they're doing?
It was so
on the
wide,
page?
some people that were doing, like John Buscema would have breakdowns, but everything was there except I put all that crazy machinery in. I mean, he didn't draw that. That was Wally Wood channeling me, and I would, but you do it because you have to love this medium.
Right.
You have to love it because, I was talking to Neal once about it, Neal Adams.
Right.
We were talking about this one time, how much, I won't mention what it was, what he was getting for the X-Men and what I was getting for the X-Men.
Oh, wow.
I was not working that cheap in advertising, but you loved it.
Right.
And it showed. There's something about doing something that you love. It just is better than some of the advertising paid very well, but I was bored by it. But you feed the client. The client wants you to do something, so you do it, but it was, the comics were my vacation each month,
Oh, I know. You and me are in the same boat on that, yeah.
Really?
Comic books are my vacation, exactly.
Yeah.
They're a magical getaway. But I want to talk a little bit about something you just mentioned real quick, about how sometimes you have to do a lot more work and sometimes not as much. Do you prefer one over the other, like, oh, I can fill this page however I feel, or is it more like you would rather have a little bit more of kind of a strict, like this is
No, it's more fun. I'm working with Butch Geis right now on
Right.
something that he leaves it open, and I'm adding a lot of grays, and but I enjoy that more. I even told him I enjoy that much more Yeah, it's just a matter of being able to do a lot more today than you could do years ago. Before it was just a matter of adding more either detail, but now you can render, if that's the right word. Like I said, you can use charcoal, pastel, airbrush, whatever.
Now, is there a lot of back and forth as far as like, hey, this fixing of anything, or is there any kind of times where there might be a disagreement, like how something should look or a tone that you sometimes have to communicate in a way that's like, I don't want to be kind of a dick here, but I feel like this is the way to do this, or this guy's hand.
No, I never get locked into that.
Yeah.
It is comics. And they are comics, or they are comic. You don't want you can be a comic, but I'm an editor. Very rarely does an editor get involved. Usually it's, but the guy you're working with maybe will want to have something changed. But you don't. It isn't something to have a discussion over. It isn't.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
No, I mean, it's worth it. It's comic books.
Okay. Speaking of comic books, let's talk about some of the things that like inspire you. Like you've had such an amazing range on your career. Like, are there certain? You'd mentioned how you can pick different things from across the room, but there are stuff today that you look at and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Or throughout kind of your career, what are some of your favorites, or who kind of like most inspired you to be like, oh, I got to step up my game?
Step up my game. Well, even to this day, I'm not going to mention names. Every list is a list of exclusion. Seriously, if you forgot to mention somebody.
Oh, yeah.
Really.
Well, I don't want to get you in trouble.
No. I'm in trouble. I can do it on my own. Yeah. But the years ago when I was said that, it was the artist that you could recognize, and that's a problem today. Like the paperback covers, they're all type. The graphic, artists are getting lost. The style. I think Neal, or I mentioned Neal. I'll use Neal again, but I'm sure there's others that you can look at a cover or the artwork inside and know it's their artwork. Yeah. They're still around.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, like I can always tell when John Romita Jr. is working on it. Like,
forgot about it. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I love working with John too.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was terrific storyteller, but very underrated. He's very good. I should take a side note here.
Okay.
He would lay out perspective on Kick-Ass, the page. I just sit there and look at them. You'd see all his lines and all the vanishing points and everything else. And, oh my God, it's like a lesson, each one of these.
Wow.
But he'd have Daddy and Hit Girl in a room there on a couch looking at the TV, and there's three different perspectives because you're looking down at them and they're on a different plane and there's another plane. But it's that good, but you don't see it when you're a reader.
Right.
But his stuff looks that good because it's correct. When you know there's something wonky, it's usually the perspective. Anatomy you can get away with a little bit, but when something doesn't work, it's not on the same, they're not walking on the same plane, so to speak. But it's just a lot of very good artists around today. I think, you know why, and there's nothing left. Advertising was falling behind me, and as I've gone through, well, the last 10 years even, where do you see artwork? Magazines don't use it. No. Advertising uses it, photography. The only creative area are comic books today.
Wow.
Really. If not, tell me where it is. So you've got a lot of good talent that's in comics today.
Yeah, a lot of amazing talent.
Yeah.
Which is great for us comic book nerds.
Sure.
So, out of your long career, you've had to kind of be hunched over a table and
I never hunch over.
Okay, well, sitting up straight.
Herman Miller chair.
All right. We'll talk about how you've avoided injury and longevity and what kind of things you do so you don't cramp up or get carpal tunnel or any of those kind of injuries you hear about that can be an issue for an artist.
Well, what helped me is that I was doing Kick-Ass, I had my hip replaced. I couldn't take the pain and everything else before. And that changed my life because now I could do all the things I couldn't before, go to a gym, and exercise, and everything else. Yeah. But, I don't know. I move around. I'm very peripatetic. I'm always walking around my studio, getting water, change the water. But I can't sit for a long period of time. That's probably good.
Yeah, I would say, yeah. That's
I'm getting up. I got to get up and move around. But I get exercise and take some either vitamins or whatever. But that, I think, is the attitude. I love what I do, and I think if it was drudgery, I think that would be a different thing. How many people have to work at a job they can't stand,
Yeah. All right, so...
You say that like you're...
I have a day job, my friend, that pays the rent that I do not like. This is my fun time. So if you could go back in a time machine, you had mentioned before, would you maybe, grab some of your artwork or make copies of some stuff? If you had the possibility of like, hey, here's the time machine for a day, nobody's looking, like what might you want to do? Or, maybe you've lived a perfect life. I don't know.
Well, not perfect, but I don't know if I would change my life.
Right.
Because there's something about letting destiny take its course.
Right.
And it hasn't been so bad to this point. So, but that's a very good point about having a copy, running down and making copies of those pencils by Neal or by John Buscema or whoever, even Gene. Yeah. Some of the stuff was just amazing what he was doing. Gene rendered, they looked like black and white photos at times, there was all this rough, not rough, but soft, the pencil line itself. He didn't work with a point, he worked on the side. Yeah, maybe that, but
all right.
I wouldn't change my life at all about that.
Well, no, I just meant maybe, I would have, placed a bet in the 80s or something.
Well, someone said you'd buy Apple stock.
Right.
I don't think Apple was around back then. So.
Sure. Maybe invent, hey guys, I have this idea for a computer. Cool. So guys, now we're going to have a little time and we're going to do a little audience Q&A. So you guys get to fire away here for Tom.
Hello again. We met last year at New York Comic Con and we talked at length at their table. And I remember meeting your daughter and your son. And I was wondering, when they were young, were they interested in what you did, and how did you, if they were, how did you, get them more involved in art if they were interested in doing what you were doing?
My son showed interest, I think, as all children do. But if he sees this, I'm sure he'll remember it. He was getting a little bit older, and I have a wet palette. I put the paints out with acrylics, and I left out. He wanted to try some painting, and I left it out. And every time he'd go through the studio, I'd say, it's over there. And he never really gravitated to it, and I would never said anything to him. You can't have family, friends, or whatever telling you to be an artist or being anything. I suppose your parents said, I want you to be a lawyer. And you don't want to be a lawyer, you want to be an artist or whatever. So, and my daughter, I don't think she even looked at the comic books. My son got into the comics. My son, Wanted to be an editor in DC, worked at Wizard,
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he started out there. He was a kid, he was writing a column for them. He was,
oh, yeah.
I was at Walton Wheezy's, and Gareb Seamus, he was just starting the magazine, and my son was there, and Wheezy said, Tom Palmer's son is a, bright writer. And he had this gig. I don't know if anybody read Wizard back then. I did a little cartoon drawing of him,
Oh.
So he's talented. They're both creative people. Very bright, a lot smarter than me. Believe me. And I need them when my phone isn't working right, or I really screwed on the computer. My son is always getting me out of trouble. Guess what? So it was, I said before, and it really is true that I grew up with my kids, but now they're more mature than I am. Yeah. I'm still a kid, and but I think they're centered and well balanced, and I think that's the most important part. And I loved it growing up with them. I mean, they grew up with me.
Yeah, that would be nice that you were at home. Yeah, that way you could. Was it tough some days where you just wanted to run outside and play with your kids and be like?
I did. Well, we used to, I used to sneak away and wind up working late that night,
Yeah, sure.
Some nights I was doing advertising and I'd be up all night and then have to deliver it. And then I started to get somebody delivered because I was driving there. It was like I was drunk and I couldn't do it.
Oh, man.
I didn't get a lot of sleep during that period of time. I really,
Kids
doing the
are-
comic books and the advertising. But a growing family, a mortgage, and
Yeah.
you
You
know,
gotta do what you gotta do.
you gotta do what you gotta do. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hey, Tom, I think the big revelation of this interview is the Jack Kamen influence. You know, Kamen wasn't like in the same league as Wally-Wood or the really great EC artists, but he was known for his fine line cross-hatching, and you became a hit as an inker because of your fine line cross-hatching on Gene Colan and Neal Adams especially. So was it the influence by Kamen? Is that where you learned the pen and ink cross-hatching?
He was doing advertising on and did not do any cross-hatching.
But his EC work, you
Oh,
remember,
you know,
he used a lot of fine line
He's
cross
gone
hatching.
now, and I'll admit, I never told him. I never cared for his work.
But that's my point. He wasn't one of the
I like Wally-Wood, Al
right
Williamson, you know,
along with everybody
Jack
else. He was
Davis.
like the working man's EC artist.
Yeah.
But like I said, he did have a fine line cross hatching, and I just thought maybe
No,
that.
there's not-
So that's interesting.
I was just watching him put. He was doing a campaign for Mack Truck, and the paintings he did. He had this ersatz way of doing it. He would put some acrylic down and then use colored pencil, and then use an electric eraser and blend the colors. And I'm saying, holy gee, it looked terrific. That was the way he worked. But watching him set up the illustration, I don't know if these other guys, Woody or Al Williamson, even would want to. Jack was more versatile. He was more rounded. He had Harvey Dunn as a teacher. You know who Harvey Dunn is? You know who Harvey Dunn is? The name, the artist?
The last name? What?
Dunn, D-U-N-N?
No, haven't heard of him.
Well, he was from the, he studied with Howard Pyle. You know who Howard Pyle is?
Okay. I know, sure.
And Jack had him as an art teacher. So Jack had inherited this, but he got a job in comic books, just like a lot of guys coming out of World War II. They're looking for work. That's when he started to do the comic book. I think he was working before he went into the Army.
But then where did you get your pen and ink cross hatching technique from? On your own?
Well, it's not like something that, well, you'd see it. I don't know. It's just part of, how do you take a pen or a brush and black ink, that's all you have, and make gray tone? Stipple, like, what was his name? Virgil Finley. You know that name?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I don't know how he
Right.
stayed, I don't know, you went crazy or what, and what was dots? So you have cross hatching, dry brush. Jack did brush. That's about it. Zipatone, that's what I used because of Wally Wood. But at the time, that's all you had. And Jack did a lot of newspaper mat ads. Have you ever saw them? You don't see them anymore, but Halloween, Thanksgiving, the family's got the turkey, Christmas. He would do these mat ads and do rather well doing them. He was getting paid well. But all that's gone. You know, you don't see that work anymore. But I don't think I learned any technique from Jack. Someone asked me that once. I said, I learned how to be an artist. Because I'd see him.
But in other words, the great pen and ink cross hatchers, Joseph Clement Cole and those guys, Charles Dana Gibson, none of them were an influence on
But that's
your
not cross
style?
hatching. Cole and Gibson, they were drawing lines, not cross hatching. The lines followed the form. From thick to thin, they were using steel pens, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, no, I don't think I get anything with that from Jack.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? Yes, you all the way in the back, sir. And wait for the mic, please.
Hi, Mr. Palmer. One of my favorite images is you did a painting for Marvel for the 9/11 tribute book. And I just wanted to know if you could just talk a little bit about getting that assignment and how you chose your composition, how you worked on that.
Wow. Yeah, my son is going to run that this coming September, the anniversary. I really have not. That was very personal. You know, I was going into New York that day to go up to Marvel, as a matter of fact, and I'm eating breakfast and I'm watching the planes hit the buildings. You know, Oh, yes, Marvel. So I went in a week later and went up to Marvel. I never saw Marvel, New York City, that way. I got in 45 minutes. I drove in. There was nothing around. So I think John Romita, the father, senior, called me and said that you got to do something for this book they're putting together. Joe Quesada was putting this book together.
Yeah.
So I went in here. I'm taking samples in because I figured they don't know that I paint. So whoever was Bob Greenberg was up there at the time said, yeah, go ahead. Whatever you want to do. I said, in color, I can paint. Oh, sure. So I went back, and it took me maybe 4 or 5 days, a week, doing sketches and sketches and sketches. I got a pile of them. I think my son's going to run some of them. And I could not find the right one. And finally, I had to deliver that Monday. That Friday night, late, I finally nailed it. And it was the towers at the base. I saw something on TV. That's what, I'm sure you know the painting, right? Because it was vacant. There was something wrong. I had the heads, and then I made them look a little ghostly and all that. And I painted it in 2 days. And wow, but once you are confident that you've got this right, the composition was right. I do good compositions, but it's like, it's murder trying to get there. I have a problem. Some guys are just, so that was personal. And I remember watching on TV these young firemen going up in the building with hoses over their arms. They never came, well, those are the guys that died. What was it? I did a couple, remember the number on the hat, the helmet, was 346 or 47. 40, yeah, firemen, and policemen too. But the firemen with all these young guys going up. Imagine hoses, that building. They never, well, they came down, but not, not alive. And that remained with me. Neal Adams and I did an interview with Jeannie Most for CNN, I believe. And we were talking about that, and Neal had done something for the book too, was the centerpiece. And she asked me about it, and I don't know what else to say, but she said, hey, it looked like a Norman Rockwell, and I said, it wasn't, because of humanity, I guess, but there was much more personal in that. And they had an auction to raise money for the Giuliani Fund. And I had let them auction it off. They auctioned off a lot of artwork, and I gave them. So I don't have the original anymore. But luckily, the day I brought it into Mo, I took it in that Monday morning. And I had to do it 11 by 17 because they had to scan it, and the book had to go out that week. So they couldn't photograph or anything like that. So I made good copies of it. Luckily, I did that because you just thought we'd have what's in the book, But it's nice that you asked about that. So watch September. I don't know how close to the September 11th, Anyway.
All right. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. It was an absolute honor.
Thank you, sir.
Sitting there talking with you.
My pleasure.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Tom Palmer. I want you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Dare2Draw.
All right. Yeah.
Finally.